So we have a team right here alone of close to 70 people in these 4 companies that are dedicated to ORC. I mean, obviously, you know, this is an issue, it's recognizable, I mean, it's real, it's there. But, you know, now that we've talked about that, I mean, there's a number of retailers out there and LP professionals that are skeptical about ORC and the problem and think it's a little more hype than reality. What would you say to them, and how do you convince them that it's not hype?
I think it's rather simple. I hate to minimize that, but it's really being able to communicate in a language that they can relate to and understand and articulate the message to them. So there is a lot of hype. There's a lot of, you know, media around it. And you're also pressuring, as far as the field level folks, you're kind of pressing onto their turf, and you have to be delicate with that. But I think when you can articulate, whether it's to leadership or other professionals, where the problem goes beyond the box, you know, beyond the 4 walls, and certainly to your point, it's online too, you know, for the impact there. And it gets to the point where the folks that we have local within our box dealing with the everyday loss prevention issues, it's out of their control to manage. And then you add on to today's society and the pressures economically with law enforcement, the judicial systems, pressures to felony thresholds, et cetera. It enables what we would initially deem as an everyday shoplifter to repeat quite often. So what happens is it goes beyond that repeat shoplifter. The problem is being fueled by a demand, by the fence, as we would call it, and whether that's an online broker, you know, or your traditional fences. So I think it's educating them and getting past the myth, getting past the hype, and showing them, you know, truly, you know, what the problem looks like with hardcore examples sometimes to make them a believer.
You know, Gus, I would tell you that prior to joining the National Retail Federation in 2005, my entire span at Disney, I never really recognized the issue of organized retail crime. I mean, sure, I knew we had professional shoplifters. They would target DVDs, new release, and they'd take hundreds of them from the store. So we knew the problem was there, but we just isolated it as professional shoplifting. And it wasn't until I spent time with some of the folks around this table and many others in the industry that it brought some clarity to how widespread and how organized these criminal enterprises have really become. We did a survey earlier in the year. 95% of retailers nationwide say they've been the victim of organized retail crime. So whether that's a major multi-million-dollar ring or an individual that's targeting many of their stores and multiple products, I mean, there's certainly a lot of education that needs to take place, but I think Scott made a great point. The reality is when you look at shrink numbers, and by the way, in 2011, all the numbers we were looking at went up. Shrink, according to National Retail Security Survey, University of Florida, up. Global Retail Theft Barometer, up. Returns fraud, up. So those indicators tell us that there's something out there. And when you go back and look at what the specific causes of shrink are, and what you can really nail down as, you know, this was true internal, this was true external, this is true systemic problems. Reality is you only get to about a third of the number where you can, beyond a shadow of a doubt, tell exactly what caused the problem. So that leaves 2/3 that are really the unknown. And I think what all of these companies have in common, as well as a number of others, every stone they turn over, it leads back to these big groups or a very sophisticated individual that's figured out the game of cat and mouse. And they get away with it time and time again, and they keep coming back until law enforcement and retailers work together to recognize there's a problem at the company, figure out how to go about attacking it, and then get results.
You know, looking at it, and both of you said when you're looking to staff your ORC department, you look for specific traits. Can we talk to building the ORC programs? I mean, you look for specific traits. What are you looking for? You know, what kind of candidates do you look for? And what are you looking for in that group? And are they that much different from a typical retail store loss prevention executive? Nelson?
Well, I mean, first thing I always think about is, strong investigative skills, and whether that be fraud, whether that be developing cases, whether that be surveillance skills, whether it be mobile, foot surveillance, whatnot. But some of my best investigators, ORC investigators over the years, didn't have a lot of experience, just like I didn't. I came in, I just pretty much fell into it. And I actually Joe mentioned Limited Brands earlier. John Talamo was one of my original mentors when it came to starting up the Gap Inc. program. It's also finding people that are really good at influencing. Can they influence law enforcement to take the case? Can they really, whatever it takes to button it up with this, bow and whatnot? Those are just the type of things, go-getters. I mean, people that are very creative. They take no for an answer when they run up against a wall, and especially on fraud cases. What does it take to peel back a few more layers? So the creativity, the strong investigative skills, and some of my team members are former law enforcement, some aren't. But be able to go in again and influence a district attorney. Why is it important for them? What's in it for them to take a case? So those are just a couple of my thoughts.
Deb?
Pretty similar. My teams are broken into smaller groups, so teams of 2 or 3 in the major metropolitan areas, and we really look for a balance of that external influence, maybe with some law enforcement background, a great communicator. I mean, you hit it perfectly, very persuasive, that hunter instinct to be able to find a way to get past those roadblocks. But also with the teams, I have to bring in a balance of, some Home Depot loss prevention, because part of trying to articulate or sell a case, if you would, is to help educate law enforcement with, how the boosters are getting away with what they're doing. How are they getting away with a return fraud? How are they generating so many store credits or going on to online, means? So having a thorough knowledge base of how the company runs is important to really put the whole case together, because a lot of these are going to be data driven. So once you identify, where the risk is coming from or the group that's hitting you, to look and see how big it is and running backwards with some data. So a lot of different skill sets need to come into balance. But I think a key is that law enforcement background, a balance to be able to go in and really talk the talk. I mean, to put
So
it
a
basic.
mixture. A mixture of in-house, a mixture of law enforcement,
Yep.
and a mixture of good investigators.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, good investigator, persuasive, communication skills, so they can package something, find a way to package, and find a way to sell it to who they need to. We can package it with a bow, but we need to be able to influence on why it's important to law enforcement or the district attorney to take this case.
Denny, you had mentioned that you obviously look for the same or separate leadership skills and such. I mean, can you elaborate on that?
I do, Gus. I agree with Nelson and Deb. I think the perfect candidate is someone who has that corporate background that they can look at the shrink and identify from a corporate standpoint of what's happening. I think one of the biggest problems that is affecting all retailers is taking that case to the prosecutor or taking it to law enforcement. I heavily look at their law enforcement background, not necessarily that they were just performing law enforcement duties, but were they involved in narcotics investigations? One of the best skills that I found, and we look for this when we go to hire, is can they regulate confidential informants? And this is where you get in, can the person with the LP background, does he have that skill set to actually handle confidential informants, since the vast majority of our cases, we flip the booster in the store, sure, and they work for us. Sure. And it takes a special skill set to be able to work with that confidential informant. And then when you take that case to law enforcement, we see our investigators that had law enforcement background can talk the talk with the law enforcement agencies. Right. And it sort of cuts through a lot of red tape that I've seen of investigators that didn't have that law enforcement skill set.
Plus, and they're ready to present the case in final form, they have the subject matter expertise to do so.
They've been down that road hundreds of times in dealing with the courts and dealing with other law enforcement agencies. Most of the people we hire have been on task forces, and they've worked well with other law enforcement agencies. And we hire them for that region. And we're hiring them because they know the law enforcement in their communities. And they can get those cases to law enforcement maybe a lot quicker than someone without that skill set.
Scott, anything to add to that? You're in a unique box with a unique product line.
Yeah, we do have a unique box, and we also have a very unique approach that differs slightly from some of the others. So the list of what I look for is very long. I'll throw a few of them off the top of my head. They definitely have to be very analytical by nature. Someone who embraces technology, very important for me personally, but also to the success of our program. I look for someone who has very good platform skills. I think for what we do, you know, approaching someone on their doorstep and interviewing them at their homes, I think that you have to be comfortable in your own skin, Gus. And if you have good presentation skills, generally speaking, you know, you may be rusty the first few times out, but you can pick that up, you know. So I definitely look for that. You have to be a fantastic interviewer. If you were to look at the job description I've put together, you'd scratch your head and say, really? HR let you get away with that? Because I got to tell you something, I asked for a lot of unique things, all right? But it's proven successful. We've got 2 investigators that run coast to coast. And, you know, the information is fed one of 2 ways, either through our incident management system or through proactive searches. You know, we have a tool called the ORC Workbench that works very effectively to identify online sellers. But we get information any way possible. And they have to take that case and develop it from cradle to grave. And I hold them accountable for that. So, you know, you have to have a tremendous work ethic and be able to you know, live on the road for extended periods of time and utilize any available resource. I like what Denny said, and all my peers for that matter, as far as communicating and winning over law enforcement as well. Very important. And again, that goes back to the platform skills. I'm okay at it, but I've got people that work for me that are phenomenal at it. You know, and I'd like to thank my boss, Jeff Fulmer, because he's got the courage to stand back and say, okay, this is a concept forming. Now, this dates back about 6 years, Gus, but this is a concept forming. I have faith in Scott and I have faith in his team that they can do this, and it's proven very successful for Barnes & Noble.
Well, and given the economic issues and the pressures on budgets and such, and what kind of ROI model do you use? I mean, how do you measure the individual or the team corporately? You've got to be constantly challenged about the budget issues. I mean, how do you make that case with senior management when budget time comes?
I can tell you we developed a template that we use in all of our ORC cases. And that template is based on our shrink, based on if it was scanned out as theft. When we take down a fence, what we do is, I think our model drills down and it's very, very specific and it gives us the information we want, because coming from government, I don't inflate cases. I learned that 20 years ago. So I wanted a template that would show us a true ROI. And what we came up with was taking our theft that was scanned out as theft from our shrink. When we dismantle a fence, we look at the products we used in the reverse buys. And then we only counted those products in the stores within a 3-mile radius of that fencing operation, and only used those stores to see what the reduction in shrink was. And I think that gives us a very, very realistic view of what that fence was worth. How much product was he moving? And our shrink that we looked at is, it's double digits, because we look at 12 weeks before the arrest and 12 weeks after the arrest. So we know that they were stealing from us 12 weeks before. When law enforcement makes the arrest, we see a dramatic stoppage in those items from our stores in that area, and we calculate our shrink on how much that fence was worth. And based on the booster who's cooperating with us, telling us how long he's been taking product to that fence, along with the 20, 30 other narcotics users.
So you have an equation that you use. use that you apply.
Yes, we have a template. We came up with a
And one
template.
that's accepted by the accounting department, by auditing. I mean, they accept this template, they've agreed on it.
More importantly, it's been approved by senior management because I have to defend those numbers.
Certainly, certainly.
And I don't have a problem going to senior management and saying, this fence, this is what we seized, this is what our shrink improved by after the arrest, and this is what that fence was worth.
Is there an accepted template for the industry yet? I mean, have all of you been able to get together and say, here's the template for a successful ORC program?
I can answer that no.
Okay.
I think everybody would have their own template.
Sure.
That's what we use.
Sure.
And we found it successful, but I think Deb and Nelson and Scott would, find a different template to use according to their shrink.
It's been talked about for years.
I'm sure.
And every company, the different sectors have ways they look at inventory or
Right.
shrinkage in their stores. But Denny raised an interesting point, and part of that template or part of the commitment is recognizing that the organized retail crime cases are a very different time and resource commitment than a shoplifting case or even a habitual offender case that might be dealt with and dispositioned right away. The ORC cases might take months, years
longer life
to
cycle.
develop. And some companies, and maybe Scott will speak to this, have a different approach to handling ORC type cases. But I think I call that out because the companies vary so significantly from the sectors they're in to even the resources that we heard about. We're all, I think, looking for how do we make this argument and case to law enforcement, to senior management, and to the greater industry, and crosses many different crime barriers: theft versus fraud versus counterfeit versus cargo.
Nelson, any?
Well, one thing I can add, Denny and I have done presentations where we're good friends. We're on a number of committees together, and he's absolutely right. It depends on the sector. His fence likely is a geographical, product, people bringing merchandise, product in from, within a handful of miles, maybe more. One of our typical fences in Van Nuys that we work could be merchandise coming in from Texas, could be coming in from North Carolina, it could be from 15 different states. And then how do you go back to Gap and say, this is going to, by shutting down this fence, it's going to put out this boosting team. So it's very fascinating, even if you just look at fences, being able to prove where that product came from and the impact it's going to have on Gap Inc. Because if it, again, if it came from Seattle and it was maybe 3 or 4 trips up there, and are they going to go back to Seattle next month? Maybe not. The boosting team, they're constantly changing their directions, certainly.